Good morning and welcome to a review, a deep dive perhaps even, not a word I use often, of a book that I haven't just finished reading, funnily enough. So those of you who are repeat viewers of this channel will have noticed that this pile here, my potential haul pile, is slowly growing. And on that tray I came up with a book that I already owned but I couldn't resist. This is an illustrated Robinson Crusoe. It's a hardcover. It's in, I'm going to say, moderately good condition for its age, and it is illustrated. What exactly its age is open to the imagination. It's published by Ward, Lock, Bowden and Co. And it is illustrated with some spectacular black and white illustrations. And those onion skin covers over it. It's got those thick, heavy pieces of paper that are almost like cardboard, and the print is very comforting to read. If you're here, you're probably a reader. You probably know that some books just sit in your hand and are more enjoyable to read than other books, which is where the copy that it's replacing, Robinson Crusoe, comes in. This is a Wordsworth classic that I bought in 2020 because back then I did yearly challenges. I was a good read person and I checked each of my shelves a type of book that I enjoyed but didn't read very much, and each year I dedicated myself to increasing the number of books that I'd read on that shelf. 2020 was a year for classics, and it was a great reading year. I went through all these books that I knew, didn't know, thought I'd read, hadn't actually read, and reread old favourites like the Jane Austens, but really expanded my reading knowledge, and Robinson Crusoe was one of those. So Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe is beyond a doubt a book that we all know. It has entered popular culture to such an extent that I don't think you could find many people on the face of the earth who don't know Robinson Crusoe's story, whether it's through reading little kiddie books that they were given as children, or watching the Pierce Brosnan movie that was made. I have not seen that. Or just through popular culture. It has entered our existence in a quite extraordinary way. And it's quite extraordinary because when you think about this, it was published in 1719, which makes it over 300 years old. This was published in a world that we can't even conceive of. We can't even start to understand what the early 18th century was like compared to what we are today, unless you're a historian or a geek and really into that sort of stuff. I'm slightly geeky, but not geeky enough to have an image in my head of what Daniel Defoe's world was like. Now, Robinson Crusoe was originally serialized in London, as I understand it, but then it went through dozens, maybe even hundreds of editions and translations into other languages and adaptations to all the formats, including the children's book, which was what I remembered as having read when I thought I had read Robinson Crusoe. Now, I did have a little golden book style book that I read when I was a small child, but later on I had a book that I thought was Robinson Crusoe. Spoiler, it wasn't. It wasn't this Robinson Crusoe. It wasn't the adult form that Daniel Defoe wrote to his audience in the 1700s at all. The book itself has been a major influence on literature. Some people credit it with being the book that made realistic fiction a genre, at least in England, so claiming it is the first English novel. I don't know that I agree with that. I don't know enough about the topic to really have a strong opinion. I just think it's cool that some people think that's true. Now, it's written with this combination of epistolary, confessional, didactic, and it follows a title character who is cast away on an island and spends 28 islands on a remote tropical desert island, which we would assume is somewhere near the coast of Venezuela or Trinidad, and some people assume that this book is based on the life of a real-life person who was cast away for, I think it was only 4 years, not a lifetime, and Wikipedia tells me that the name of that person was Alexander Selkirk. Again, lived for 4 years on a Pacific island, which is now part of Chile, and was apparently renamed Robinson Crusoe Island in 1966. There were other castaways that may have inspired this, but whoever inspired this, it was really the start of a whole genre. This and Ballantyne's Coral Island, those types of books, created a genre, a Swiss Family Robinson, that lasted from then to now and still draws us in. If you're like me, you probably started on books at an early age. They've been part of your life for most of your life. And those early adventure books that sparked your imagination, drew you into worlds that you didn't exist in. Maybe they inspired you to go to see real coral islands that you would never have wanted to go and see if it hadn't been for those formative books of your childhood. And Robinson Crusoe was right up there. Now, reading it in 2020 was a real shock to my system. Because this book has entered our world so significantly and so completely, it's hard to realize how different it was to what it is today in the world. This pop culture, Robinson Crusoe, this pop culture, Daniel Defoe, is not that people and is not that book. It's influenced James Joyce, Rousseau, and many other stories, such as the Swiss Family Robinson. It's inserted slang into our language, which has persevered. The Girl Friday notion originates from Crusoe's companion, who he called Friday because he found him on a Friday. Now, I really am glad that I read this book, but I can't honestly say that I loved the reading experience. I gave it 3 stars back in 2020 because of the sheer wealth of stuff and history, and it was just so rich in information and mystique and things to investigate. It deserved 3 stars, but it was often unpleasant to read. I am hoping that this one will be more pleasant. I've glanced through a couple of places, and I'm not sure if the Wordsworth is actually edited compared to this one in any way, but this one at least has chapters. Wordsworth just is one long narrative. It also has index to woodcuts in the text, which the ones that I've glanced through are absolutely spectacular. They will give one a lot of respite from the prose that is often not great. It has not aged well. So there's a simple narrative style, and it's all from the point of view of Crusoe himself. So the reading is actually at times quite charming, but it is often very simplistic, and the narration relies quite heavily on the reader liking and being able to emphasize with the character, which is a bit problematic in terms of present day. This book is of its time, and its time was a long time ago. So when Jake from Pulp Mortem recently said it's a product of its times, this is a product of its times, and its times were Scotland, with a severe attitude to religion and other nations. So yeah, that's a thing you need to remember before you start reading it in an original format. The first edition credited the book's protagonist Robinson Crusoe as its author, leading many readers to believe that he was a real person and the book was a non-fiction travelogue. It was well received in the literary world and went through, I think, 4 editions in its first year. But because that narration relies so heavily on the reader being able to emphasize with the character, by modern standards, okay, let's be honest. By modern standards, Robinson Crusoe is egocentric, ignorant, racist, a bigot. He's a pretty horrible person. Despite his having having a long standard of being a children's book, I would strongly suggest that the unedited adult version is entirely unsuited to modern children. Late teenagers, if they love their history, and we've got an adult to discuss it with, maybe, but otherwise this is quite thoroughly not a children's story. So while everyone knows the story, I would say that of every 50 people who say they know the story, not more than one has read it. It's a far more complicated plot than one might imagine, and it starts off with Crusoe as a young man defying his parents and going to sea, where disasters occur to him over and over. The first disaster occurs when he gets bitten by a parrot. No. His first disaster occurs when he sails from his home, Kingston upon Hull. Kingston upon Hull. England has these names, right? On a sea voyage, United Kingdom has these names. Sorry, I got it in time. 3-second rule. So this sea voyage occurred in August 1651. Against the wishes of his parents, he ran away to sea, as it were, and after a tumultuous voyage, his ship is wrecked in a storm. Now this story is exciting and vibrant. It does not sugarcoat the harder aspects of sea life, and the story of the ships trying to stand off the shore in the storm are magnificent. If you like reading ocean-type stuff, the ships trying to not be wrecked, whew, loved every second of it. Crusoe then goes to sea again, and this time he's captured by Moorish pirates and sold into slavery, where he remained for a couple of years before escaping to sea. After his escape, he ends up in Brazil, where he becomes a successful plantation owner before joining a seafaring expedition to bring slaves from Africa to the plantations, moving on from that swiftly. It is on that journey that he shipwrecks again on the island that forms the location for pretty much the rest of the story. And in actual fact, that final shipwreck doesn't happen until we're quite a ways through this book. Just shoulder for a while, hey? Chill. I can't remember how far through. I think it was about 100 pages into this 230, 250 book. It was a significant way in before we ever met the island. And, well, all of those adventures up to then are fun and thoroughly enjoyable and very exciting. The key moralistic assumptions by the author can be jarring. So if you can ignore the didactic style up until the wrecking, it is kind of a charming story, despite the immensely preachy attitudes, and Defoe made Robinson Crusoe incredibly egocentric. I don't know how to interpret that. Is that how Defoe himself thought about things? Was this a 1700s writing or storytelling tactic? I don't know. I'd love to find out. If you know more about this book than me, by all means, let me know. So, given the fact of what we were dealing with between the Moorish pirates and the plantations and everything else, there is a lot of racism and immensely inhuman attitude to other people and all animals. Bad attitudes to animals do not work for me terribly well, and there's a fair bit of it. But product of its times, right? It absolutely is. You are reading a novel that is not a historical novel, it's a novel written historically, and you need to be braced for it. So, once he arrives on the island, the story changes, and it changes significantly in tone. Now, this was the part of the story that I originally thought I was there for, but I really enjoyed the early sea voyages, and Crusoe is surviving on the island for almost 30 years, on his own for about 20 years of that, then a few more after getting a companion who he calls Friday. And yes, as a modern reader, it is a thing that instead of asking this guy his name, he gives him a name because skin colour. The island, which I had been waiting for, was once again entirely unexpected. I remembered it as a sandy Coral Cay type island, a Pacific tropical island, and for the modern reader who knows a bit about islands, this island, Robinson Crusoe's island, can often be exceptionally puzzling. Crusoe Crusoe is meant to be a model of resourcefulness and industry, and he never seems to sit still for a second. It details how he builds a house, makes things with inadequate tools, provides the tools themselves, explores a very little bit. Not very much. Considering that he was there for more than 6 months, he didn't really explore that island as much as a modern reader or a modern deserted person who had read books would. But yeah, anyway, he finds and grows food, and some of his choices and activities seem exceptionally odd to a modern, more sophisticated reader of abandoned on tropical island consumers. So that's my modern take on it. So this section was the one that has set children's imaginations on fire for so many years, and it set mine on fire absolutely. I imagined it was me on that deserted island. I imagined exploring all of it, the adventures I had, swimming in the limpid tropical lagoons with colourful fish. And I imagined the things I would have, the things I would make and do, how I would do it differently. Plenty of that, of course, because all kids know the world better than adults. And so there I was, as an adult, reading this, and it's often quite hysterically funny, because while Defoe was keen on travel and went to Europe a lot, I suspect that this allegedly Pacific, but possibly Caribbean island is strongly based on Mediterranean islands he visited and books he read about areas of the world he had never visited. So this island has savannas and sandstone mountains, which, I've got to tell you, Pacific islands, at least in the Western Pacific, are not noted for these things. It's not completely absent, but sandstone mountains on coral caves, these two, one of these things is not like the other one. So that was interesting. We've got wild goats, which predominantly didn't exist on islands until they were released by European sailors. Crusoe eats and tames these goats, and he also makes butter out of their milk, which really mind-twisted me for a while, because to the best of my knowledge it is pretty much impossible to make butter out of goat's milk. Cheese, yes, but I don't think it has the fat content. Anyhow, this magical island with the mysterious goats who have mysterious milk which makes butter, correct me if I'm wrong, has endemic goats, parrots, wild cats, sure, nesting turtles, absolutely, tobacco, sugarcane, Sugarcane did spread throughout the Pacifics as various tribes canoed around the place. You can actually track sugarcane. Sugarcane is one of the ways of checking how humans spread throughout the Pacific. So I'll take the sugarcane. Melons, grapes, ixnay the grapes. So this combination is unlikely enough to fill any ecologist with mirth. But rather than mirth, I was often quite confused. Crusoe's island is in fact about as far from reality as the land of Narnia. So anyone who's likely to be upset to a fantasy approach to ecology, botany or zoology may struggle to read this as much as someone who is oversensitive to racism might struggle to read this. I laughed a lot and only occasionally was upset. Now, Crusoe's intrepid inventiveness apparently inspired Jean-Jacques Rousseau in his book on education, Emile, which I have and haven't read yet, to make Robinson Crusoe the one book the protagonist is allowed to read before the age of 12. Rousseau wanted Emile to... I really need to read this one, to identify himself with Crusoe so that he could rely on himself and all of his needs. I want my bird to shut up, so I can think. How's that working? Parrots were on this island, but they were the really, really colourful parrots that one sees in South America, I believe, rather than the types of parrots that you are more likely to see in tropical islands. There you go, Fluff. So, I didn't share Rousseau's boundless enthusiasm for the book. I would not make this the only book that a boy reads until age 12 in order to encourage his resourcefulness. I agree more with the novelist James Joyce, who attributed to Robinson Crusoe a variety of stereotypical and hostile English racial characteristics. describing the manly independence and the unconscious cruelty with considerably less enthusiasm than Rousseau had. Now, Rousseau's glowing impressions doubtless contributed to this being seen for so long as a book suitable for children, but in addition to his recommendations, there's also that very strong Christian theme. Now, Daniel Defoe was a Puritan Christian of the Scottish variety, which I do believe is a bit different to other Puritan Christians. I don't know how. And Crusoe, while he starts out as an independent, adventurer, open-minded type of guy, he slowly becomes more Christian as the book progresses. So by the time we reach the island and he's been deserted, he's spending a lot of time reading the Bible, preaching about God more and more to the reader, making little lists with the evil things and the good things. The evil things being that he's been deserted on the island, if I remember correctly. The good things being that God saved him by making the ship wreck close to the island so that he could get off it. Strong Christian mythology happening here. There's a lot more reading the Bible and preaching God than there is, in fact, of exploring the island for the first couple of years. And as a child, I found that part fairly easy to read and ignorable. It was probably edited down for the child's version. As an adult reading this much more extensive one, I found it a little bit more disturbing. Completely in character with the author, his times and his readership, yes. So entirely of its milieu. I can imagine generations of parents giving this book to their kids in the hope that it would make them humble, religious, in awe of God and the Bible. Well, what the kids were actually getting at it was a lust to go to sea and kill marine turtles. Of its times. Now, after Crusoe has been on this island for 20 years, though without having explored all of it, which it's not the hugest island in the world. Surely you'd climb that mountain and look on the other side of it. Oh yes, and monkeys. Monkeys on Pacific Islands. But I will totally forgive that because that is such a beautiful woodcutting. Any one of these I would hang on my walls. Oh, and about this book, I don't know if you can quite see it, but the letters on the spine are gilt. Just stunning. Anyhow, yes. So after he's been on this island for 20 years without having thoroughly explored it, and once again, how do you live on a very medium-sized island for 20 years without ever bothering to go to the other side? But he finally does, and he finds out it's visited by cannibals for their feasts. Now, the English used to firmly believe that anyone black, especially in the Pacific, was by default a cannibal, and they were utterly obsessed with this concept. So there's a lot of insulting racial stereotyping that follows, even more than previous racism, which was at times already kind of acute of its times. Now, he rescues a young man who'd been destined to be dinner, calls him Friday without asking his name, and proceeds to civilize him and use him as a servant. This part is what it is, again, product of its era and society in which it was written. At no point does Crusoe ask for any information from the local man about plants or animals, which he admits he knows nothing about. At no point does Defoe even vaguely suspect that Crusoe, as a white Englishman, might not be 100% superior in every way. So, of course, Friday is converted to Christianity, which is a thing that happened in the Pacific a lot, in real life as well. This attitude is also very strong in Ballantyne's Coral Island, another classic book that I read around about 2020, and which is a fantastic adventure story, which I adored in a way that I did not adore Robinson Crusoe. So the last 60 or 70 pages of this book are how Robinson Crusoe is rescued, taken back to Europe, and his adventures there. There is rather a lot of this once again. So again, this deserted on an island is much less of the book than you expect, and being rescued isn't the end, which is, I think, what was the end in most children's versions or edited versions. Now, it details how Crusoe, who has, by the way, lived on a deserted island for nearly 30 years, teaches a sea captain how to regain his ship, and an extensive and immensely detailed description about how his finances fared while he was marooned. How would you expect your finances to fare if your nearest and dearest lost track of you 30 odd years ago. I don't know. Anyway, honestly, I didn't see the point of any of the finance stuff, but finances, accounting, not my thing. Apparently Defoe's thing. So, after having made it back to Europe, Defoe writes the most ludicrous account of a winter trip across the Pyrenees Mountains while being attacked by packs of hundreds and wolves of bears, from which Crusoe's bravery and strategic brilliancy save the party. I kid you not. This was a real down point of the novel. It's like Defoe realised he's about to make it home to the beloved United Kingdom British Isles, and he needed to finish with a bang of the winter trip across the Pyrenees, and more wolves and bears that I think were ever supported in the entire European continent at any one time. So, I had a long review. Nearly done. And I've complained extensively about this book, I know, because there's a lot to complain about it. But all the things that I'm complaining about, I strangely enjoyed while reading them as well. So I'm very glad I read it, because now I know. And when I pick up this book in the next couple of years and sit down to read it, I will be braced for being preached about Puritanism. I will be braced for the huge, huge amount of adventures that I get before we ever reach the island. I'll be braced for the fact that this island, well, it doesn't quite have talking centaurs and talking badgers like Narnia, but it might as well be Narnia. Although I've got to say, at his best, Robinson Crusoe is not as good a protagonist as the Pevensie children. Just saying. Okay, a 300-year-old storybook. It's pretty impressive and very strange, as you would expect. Like many older works of literature, good bits, bad bits, aspects, what we would call patchy writing, but I don't think Defoe was writing it as patchy writing. I think the different bits and pieces were different aspects of what he was trying to narrate. Anyhow, Robinson Crusoe, I'm upgrading from Wordsworth to this stunning book, which I would want to own in its own right, even if I didn't dislike the Wordsworth. Is it unabridged? I rather think it is, from the language and from the page count, which is large, and of course it's old enough that no one was talking about whether something's abridged or not abridged. Mind you, Wordsworth doesn't either, and I'm fairly sure there's some abridging happening there. So, Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. Should you read it in its unabridged form, or as near as you can get? You absolutely should, if you like adventure novels. If you don't mind investing a lot of time to a book that is slow to read because of the language, and is completely fascinating in how far from any form of reality a book would be in current era, Robinson Crusoe. What a long review. I'm delighted to upgrade from the Wordsworth book to this one, because I seriously did not enjoy picking up the Wordsworth hardcover, whereas this one I just almost can't wait. It's so beautiful. Thank you for watching. Read good books, maybe even read Daniel Defoe. He was certainly a great writer of his times. Have a great day.